This is my presentation on the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine was initially created in 1947, and it stated that the United States would provide political, military, and economic assistance to all democratic nations under threat from external or internal authoritarian forces. So basically, protecting countries from falling to communism or radical governments. We really realized we needed to get involved in foreign affairs after World War I and II because we joined both of those wars late, and we ended up making a big difference in the speed and outcome of the war. So if we joined both of those earlier, the war could have been a lot quicker and a lot less people might have died and less damage done. So also for the Truman Doctrine, it ended up leading to many other U.S. ideals and actions that still play a role in life today. But the main cause for acting upon the Truman Doctrine was the fear of communism and stopping the spread of it. So this kind of created the Cold War between the Soviets and the U.S. And the Cold War was basically a high amount of tension due to the spread of communism and threat of missile crises and spying. So that was one of the main foreign conflicts the Truman Doctrine got the U.S. involved in. Another one was the Korean War, and this was a war between North and South Korea. The North was communist, backed by the Soviets, and we backed the South, which was democratic. So there was the border called the 38th parallel dividing the North and South. And when the North tried to push down on South Korea to overtake them, we defended the 38th parallel and were able, over the span of 3 years, to keep the North from coming into the South, and the two countries stayed separate. So the North was communist and the South was democratic. This was considered the first major victory in the fight against communism. The next battle or war that the U.S. got involved in was the Vietnam War. And that was similar to Korea because the North was communist backed and we backed the South for democracy. This war ended up lasting around 20 years. It didn't have as great of an outcome as the Korean War because we failed to end up protecting the South. But this wasn't considered the fault of the Truman Doctrine getting the U.S. involved. It was considered the fault of the presidents who made soldiers stay in the war for so long, because over or near 60,000 people died in this war. So a lot of the U.S. citizens were really upset about us even being involved in that. A major U.S. policy the Truman Doctrine ended up causing was the Marshall Plan. And the Marshall Plan was a plan to send over $13 million in cash or money and supplies to countries in need in Europe so the weaker governments wouldn't fall to communism. And at first, the Marshall Plan also caused some conflict because the Soviet Union didn't let some of the countries near them, like Poland, participate in this, even though they might have needed it. But the Marshall Plan did greatly strengthen the economies of a lot of the countries in Europe. So as you can see by these graphs, right around 1948, when the Marshall Plan was enacted, the economies skyrocketed from the debt they were in after World War II. So this was really good for the US and those countries because it supported their economies, and then we could trade with those countries more, so it supported our economy too. So some of the effects today, even though there isn't as much of a need to support weaker countries from falling to communism, the Truman Doctrine left a lot of ideals for Americans to help others in need. There were some negative effects of it though. During the Vietnam War, soldiers committed war crimes and things that would be considered horrible by a lot of people. And this was upsetting to most Americans, so that created a bad reputation. To conclude, the Truman Doctrine was overall positive because it created a good reputation for the US for helping other countries. We ended up keeping 3 countries, South Korea, Greece, and Turkey, from falling to communism, and probably more in Europe that were weaker. And then it still stands as a policy today in the US, which is remembered and that people support.